We definitely want to give thanks to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. They are continuing to engage in their struggle for justice and liberation. And I think a lot of that was encapsulated by a quote that I read made by Leonard Peltier, the long-held 44-year political prisoner, member of the American Indian movement, framed by this government, unjustly incarcerated. And Comrade Peltier spoke of his fatigue after 44 years of being incarcerated and how his body is breaking down, but they will never break his spirit. And I mean, that's phenomenal if you think about it. A lot of us, we can't be uncomfortable 10 minutes without losing our whole composure. And here, this brother has been in prison unjustly for almost a half century, and he continues to maintain his spirit of justice. So we think of him today, we think of all of the indigenous people fighting for their lands back that we stand on, and our strong solidarity with them in doing so. And of course, we also always acknowledge our African ancestors, who are the very reason why we breathe life. And we ask them to be patient with us. We certainly are not perfect, and will continue to make errors after error after error, but they know that our heart is sincere, and that our only desire is to bring about the justice that our people rightfully deserve. So we're glad that you're able to join us today for this session, Mobilization and Organization, and we'll go right into the specific introduction so that we can get started. And so Our Ancestors' Voices is sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. It's one of the many programs that we do. We'll talk about some of them at the end, but we are about the business, shouldn't say business, about the revolution of political education around the necessity for our objective of Pan-Africanism. So Our Ancestors' Voices is sponsored by the APRP, as one of the many programs designed to facilitate that. And the APRP is a revolutionary, independent, mass Pan-African political party that is based in Africa. And our objective of Pan-Africanism that I just mentioned is defined as one unified socialist Africa. So that's what we're fighting for. That's what we want. That's what we see as the solution to the problems our people face all over the world, no matter where we're born or living, or what language we speak, or what food we eat, or what music we listen to, or what faith we worship. Until Africa is free, we don't believe any African anywhere on earth is ever going to be free. And our work to achieve Pan-Africanism is, of course, outlined in Kwame Nkrumah's legendary book, The Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, that's displayed on the opposite page. And the strategy that we're working towards is laid out in great detail in that book, and we're doing our absolute best to carry out that plan, particularly at home on the African continent. So we continue our work to do that as we speak. And Our Ancestors' Voices is, again, just one of many programs we do, but this particular program, our 121st episode today, is sponsored by the APRP and is hosted by myself, Ajamu, and my daughter, Shakura, both of us very active in the APRP. So we're glad you're here to join us, Organization and Mobilization. And to get us started, I will turn it over to Shakura.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Father. Greetings, everyone. Hopefully you all are in good spirits. I'm so excited to bring you all this conversation again. We are excited because this theme continues to come up. And I think it's important that we all keep an open mind in terms of what it is we're trying to separate. There is a difference between mobilization and organization, and that's actually getting in the way of us achieving our goal, which my dad already spoke to. But just to reiterate, the AAPRP is a socialist-based organization that truly believes that we all need to organize to help Africans everywhere, but especially on the continent of Africa, regain control of the resources that are promoted and produced from Africa. And in doing that, Africans everywhere will start to have a different level of respect, because then the continent itself will be respected, right? And so the only way to achieve that is through organizing and not mobilizing. And that's why I think this topic is really, really critical, because we need to first understand that there is a difference. And then if we were thinking that mobilizing was the way to go, then maybe we can start to escalate our thoughts and consider organizing in addition to whatever mobilization techniques we have, because you really do need a foundation of organization to work so that you can do what needs to be done. So on that note, I want to start off by saying that most people with good intentions who embark upon participating in activist work, they really believe that the door to that work is opening when they show up. So when they come to those marches, when they come to those protests, when they come to that interest meeting, whatever that may look like, although this is objectively true, the method of how you show up can be very different. And it all just depends on the course of action that you choose to take. The purpose of today's session, however, is to define mobilization work and to define organizing work and the difference between those two, because in doing that, we discuss the variances and, more importantly, the different focuses of the two very distinct activist approaches. Again, we want to stress that they are different, and we're going to highlight those differences and see how we can pull from both of them to benefit the masses of people everywhere. They would prefer if all of us were to continue to believe that there was only one aspect to activist work, and that's simply showing up. So the master wants us to believe that all we have to do is show up, and that's enough. And if we allow them to, then they will teach us that that's all we have to do. Their reason for wanting us to believe things this way is to ensure that they continue to maintain control over everything that we do. And remember, capitalism teaches you every single moment of every single day how to think. It teaches you how to believe things. It teaches you how to intercept things. It teaches you how to process things. It teaches you what's right and what's wrong. Everything you do is based off of a capitalistic system that does not value other human life. And so we have to remember that in terms of connecting the dots, if we really want to achieve a one socialist unified Africa, then we're not going to be able to rely on any capitalist entity, corporation, business, organization, structural formats, nothing like that based on that, because the very same system that we're relying on has made it incredibly crystal clear that it does not value human life. And that's precisely the opposite of what socialism is. Socialism sees the value in all humanity and expects everyone to contribute whatever their skill set is to help the conditions of society grow. And so if we expect the oppressor to just teach us one way of activism, and if we don't take it upon ourselves to research other ways, if we don't take it upon ourselves to learn other ways, and more importantly, to get involved and to start executing and practicing those other ways, then we are right where the oppressor wants us to be. More importantly, they don't have anything to worry about. They have no threat whatsoever. They have no concerns at all, because we are not showing them that we are, in fact, organizing against them. It would be the same thing if you described that you are a graduate instructor like myself, and maybe your institution that you teach classes in does not offer health insurance, just like mine does not. So if all of the graduate instructors come together and we all complain about the fact that we don't have health insurance, then we need to organize against that. And we need to let the institution know that, A, we have an escalation plan. We're going to decide that we're not going to teach classes for a week and see what happens. We're going to show up to these interest meetings and remind the provost and everybody else that we have rights and we deserve equitable wages, including health insurance and things like that. But it would be the same thing as us going to the provost and saying, can we really please just have this health care, when we already know that that's not the provost's job to give us what we want. We're going to have to take it. And by taking it, we're going to have to demand it. But I can't just demand it by myself. And JoJo can't just demand it by themselves. And Marquisha can't just demand it by themselves. We all have to come together. You know why? Because all of us need health insurance, not just one person. And it's the same thing with getting control of Africa back. That's going to benefit all of Africans everywhere. Everywhere Africans are going to benefit from that, but we all need to organize against it. That's why we all have a responsibility, which is why everyone needs to join an organization that is working for justice. You cannot get control of the resources back if you are not actively organizing against the same system that is stealing these resources every single day. So I say that to say the oppressor wants us to believe that if we do in fact just quote unquote show up, and if we're not actively excuse me, I said agitating, if we're not actively agitating the system, if we're not actively resisting the system, if we're not actively letting the oppressor know that we are not just going to show up, they're not going to tell us what to do, they're not going to frame for us what to do, we can think for ourselves, we've been doing it for years, why would we need them to help us with it now? If we let the oppressor know that we have other means and ways that we're going to take back our land, that starts to ensure to them that they can't control us anymore. And that's precisely what they're doing right now, is by teaching us, yes, just come to a protest and we'll have police there, but we won't be aggressive towards you. We're not going to harass you. That's what they want, because that's how they keep control over us. So if we resist that and let them know you don't have control, then that starts to shake up everything that they stand for, because it tells them that they need a new system. And more importantly, it tells them that we are a threat. And we should always be a threat to them. We should never be subdued and submissive beyond measure, where they don't see us as something to be endangered to their overall operation. We should constantly be making them so frightened and so fearful that they should be working overtime to try to manage this punk ASS system, because we need to let them know that we're not for it, and we're not going to tolerate it, and we're not going to accept it. And for those of us who do accept it, then just let us know that you're not with us, so we can take you out as we take everybody else out. If you are the oppressor, but you are African, let us know, because we need to get rid of you first so we can continue on with our mission. So our hope for this session is to help people define these different approaches to work in order to determine how to best support both approaches, since both are concrete and necessary methods to engage around issues of justice. We'll start with the simple definition of each approach. So when we think about mobilization work, it's defined as work that is focused on a specific problem. Mobilization work is defined as work focused on a specific problem, where masses of people are brought together to stand against a problem. An example here can be Black Lives Matter protests. The problem being identified as police terrorism against African and indigenous communities. Everyone who comes to these protests is specifically there to express what? Their outrage of whatever the problem is at hand. If you have attended one of these marches, you know that these people march next to you, sometimes for hours, but usually you'll never know their political beliefs, the person marching next to you. And in fact, you'll never know necessarily how to connect with them again, because you may not see them after that march. And if you do, it'll be for another mobilization march, etc., and so on and so forth, where you will still learn nothing about them, nothing about their political beliefs, their ideology, nothing like that. This is a characteristic of mobilization work, and it's also a drawback, I would say. The objective is to get large numbers of people together specifically to express concern against a usual problem that the collective has agreed is a problem. Historically, Dr. Martin Luther King was a great mobilizer. Here's an example. He helped spearhead some of the largest mobilization events in history, such as the standoff of the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, in the US in 1965, or the March on Washington in August of 1963. If you look at the March on Washington, for example, there are 250,000 people assembled to express outrage against racial segregation as policy in this country. It was previously stated that most of the people that came there heard the speeches, expressed their point of view against segregation, and left, never to work with and or contact the people they participated with that day again. This isn't a problem. It is obviously a great event, as the message against segregation reverberated across the world, which was the objective, just like the message against police terror reverberated after Mike Brown in 2014 and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor in 2020. Plus, most of us benefited from mobilization work to introduce us to the struggle for justice. Whether it was civil rights marches, the Occupy movement, or Black Lives Matter, this remains to be true. This introduction is important because these mobilization events help to establish the consciousness around the issues. For example, everywhere today, you hear about capitalism. It wasn't that long ago that no one dared say that word capitalism openly because of the ideological dominance of the Cold War between the US and the former Soviet Union. To talk about capitalism was as evidence that you supported the Soviet Union, which meant destruction to your career aspirations, the safety of your family, etc. Although many organizations define this, including our AAPRP, on a routine basis, the Occupy movement helped to make the critique against capitalism much more mass conversation. Same is true of the concept of police abolition. Black Lives Matter has made much more of a conversation. The facts that these conversations are convoluted and misdirected, we'll discuss more about this shortly. So since mobilization work is focused on the against and there is no singular ideological focus on solutions, which is problematic, typically mobilization work includes people who are pursuing all types of objectives. And I'm sure my dad will speak more about this, but I just want to point out, even in work study, we have struggled against this concept of Black Lives Matter and how this specific mobilization example is getting in the way of us achieving our goals as socialists. And I've had older cadre members who have been in the party so much longer than me. And I clearly am in work study. I am not in the party yet, but I hope to advance to that one day. And so they've struggled with me and helped me to understand that I want to say it was Kwame Nkrumah who said, you know, some organizations better than no organization. So I think that there's blurred lines, and I think we have to be critical when we think about what is happening here. So we have mobilization and we honor that and we understand the significance of it, but we also have to acknowledge that hopefully we can use mobilization efforts to still include and build into something greater than that. Because as I said, if there's no collection of political ideologies with you marching next door to somebody else, then you're not really growing. If there's no political ideologies, then how are you enhancing your political education? How is the other person enhancing their political education? And I would argue both would need to tap into more PE, political education, so that we can understand the foundation and the basis, A, of issues that we've already faced as a people in the past, and B, ways to address those solutions, because our ancestors have literally written it out for us. They have described for us what was going on when they were facing these same issues. Africa has been oppressed for more than this millennium, more than this decade. So we have to continue to look to our ancestors, look to the stars above, because they will not mislead us. And so I just argue we understand the importance of mobilization, but we also argue that we want to make sure that we're thinking about all the steps that need to take place. And if there's no political education, if there's no discussion around the political education, reading materials, which the party clearly has a concrete form of doing, then we're not really growing. Because if we're not taking from what other people have done, then we certainly can't understand it and break it down. And if we can't understand it and break it down, then how are we going to apply it? How are we going to apply it? Theory without practice or practice without theory, right? We've all heard that. So I just want to close with this slide by saying, since mobilization work is focused on the against and there's no singular ideological focus, then mobilization work usually includes people who are pursuing all types of objectives. On police terror, that usually meant for some police abolition, some for defunding the police, some to reform like body cameras, community review, etc. So yes, mobilization work is important work. And like people who quote Dr. King are saying, are great mobilizers, but Dr. King was not an effective organizer. Next slide, please. In comparison to mobilization work, organizing work is much more about working towards an objective and not just expressing outrage against a problem. As a result, we suggest that organizing work's highest manifestation is when it's focused around revolutionary organizing, which is driven by a single revolutionary ideology. This is fundamentally different from mobilizing work, which we state has no common ideology. Excuse me. Although, as we stated, most of us came into activist work through mobilization work. So as a result, most organizers, even revolutionary organizers, will maintain strong mobilizing skills, i.e. the ability to generate a mass of people around an issue. But the difference is organizers have an additional set of skills. Additional, you all, is the key set of skills around building specific capacity to achieve objectives. So these specific set of skills allow them to achieve objectives that are going to benefit the organization that addresses the masses of people. Malcolm X is a great example of this. He was very strong at engaging in street corner rallies against white supremacy, but his work didn't stop there. He and the people he had with them would collect names and follow up with people, talking to them about joining the Nation of Islam. Based on this follow-up, a key tool for organizing work, many of these folks did join the Nation of Islam, and Malcolm was able to make a huge contribution towards growing the Nation of Islam into a national organization. And although his mobilizing work could also be focused against police terror, as it often was, he still had the objective of recruiting people in the Nation of Islam by helping people accept that the Nation of Islam's political and religious philosophy was the answer to our people's problems. Again, by comparison, Dr. King and his organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, did not use their mobilization events to recruit people into SCLC, as Malcolm did with the Nation of Islam, because SCLC's mobilization had the focus on the problem and not a collective solution. See, there, my friends, is the difference. Mobilization is focused on this collective problem, but there's no association of a solution to address said collective problem. Whereas with Malcolm in the Nation of Islam's program, Malcolm was able to recruit for the Nation of Islam and had a focus on the problem because the Nation of Islam's program was interacting with the masses of people. So we think more about this, and we think about the All African People's Revolutionary Party and how it engages with revolutionary organizing work. And our focus is on getting people engaged in capacity building work, because we are building towards a revolutionary objective. And you cannot have revolution without revolutionaries. So we embrace the organizing approach by bringing people consistent programs like these weekly workshops. We have other comrades who are doing podcasts on different nights of the week, not just on Sundays, but other nights, so that we can continue to get the word out. And we ask of you every week, if you are an African, to join the All African People's Revolutionary Party. We also ask you, if you don't want to join the All African People's Revolutionary Party, to start an organization or to join another organization, because as I just said before, we have no doubt in our minds that it's going to take every single organization that has humanity first to make this a reality and to accomplish the goals that we have. And our goals are aligned with our Palestinian family. Our goals are aligned with our indigenous family. We don't just want to gain control of Africa. We want the indigenous people to get their land back as well. We want our Palestinian comrades to get their land back. So we understand that we're going to be working in cahoots with other organizations that may or may not have African people organizing in them. That's okay. As long as those folks understand that we need to be driven by humanity and help the people around the world, that's the same argument we have, and we believe that. And we have organizations that align with ours and support us just as we do them. And so in thinking about that, and us asking you every week to join some organization working for justice, or to consider joining the AAPRP if you are an African, then that means many people have in our workshops done just that. But the workshop is not the end of it all. The beginning of building a relationship, which, like Malcolm, will hopefully evolve into people committing to the African Revolution. If you are not African every week, we encourage you to consider joining another organization, and we offer support. And if we're having people take us up on this, then we work with organizations. We share work study circle process templates with other organizing mechanisms with them to solidify those relationships and to help them build organizing capacity. I know my dad has been working with a couple of European comrades out of Philadelphia, and literally to the poem I just said, doing exactly what we just said, helping them and guiding them to help those Europeans understand how they need to organize, because we understand that everybody needs to be organized, not just people of color and colonized people. And so meeting with these folks from Philadelphia to support them, because they needed some assistance at the beginning. And now my dad can speak more to this, but I sat in on one meeting and they seemed like they were on their way. And now it's been 6 months, 6 to 8 months that they've been meeting and consistently meeting and using some of the readings that we have aligned in our work study reading list. They've been picking from those readings as well. And so I just think that it's really important to think about how all of that looks, because that's organizing at its core, not only where you have a collective shared problem, but you also have a solution to address said problem. And there's steps with achieving the solution, but obviously increasing your political education is the first step. I truly, truly believe that, because if you don't even know how to go about dealing with the problem, then how are you going to be any good to the masses? But if you enhance your education around the problem, because our ancestors have been studying the same problem for years, then we're going to be better equipped to dealing with it. The technology may have evolved, the people may have evolved, the culture and the weather may have evolved, but the problem is still the same problem it was 500 years ago when we were kidnapped. And as long as we know that the problem didn't start in the US, as long as we know the problem started at home in Africa, then we need to go back to the baseline and go back to Africa to fix it. Another difference in organizing work is about relationships and capacity building. And that in no way is dependent upon the institutions of the capitalist system. So the police reform, healthcare reform, many of these important issues, mobilization work is centered upon. Organizing work does not require the capitalist media attention that mobilizing work relies upon. Dr. King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference were very dependent upon the media to help them publicize their events. Even today, Black Lives Matter wants media attention for their events because, again, we're trying to awaken consciousness around a problem. Organizing work presupposes that the people participating in the initial work are already aware of the problem and are not interested, and are interested in expanding towards specific solutions. So the work doesn't need media. We just need people who are serious and who are ready to sacrifice and do what needs to be done. It only needs people that are able to collaborate with one another and are willing to be vulnerable and humble to do this work. As we just said, if you're increasing political education, you're not going to know everything coming into an organizing space. And we would never expect that of you. And if you are in an organization where they expect that of you, then maybe you need to reevaluate some things, because we also have learned from our ancestors that if you truly are organizing, this is something that I still struggle with, but if you truly are organizing, then you're going to make mistakes. It's so much easier to just sit at your house and to not do anything, because then you get to critique other people. But when you're actually putting yourself on the line, you're going to make some mistakes, because I don't know about you, but I've never lived in this life before, and I've never been in work study before. This is my first time being a cis woman in work study. So I'm going to make mistakes. It's not like I have a baseline to follow up on or to follow, And so in doing that, you want what's best for the people, which is partly where the passion comes from and the emotion. And because of that, you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. Obviously, you try to learn from them and you grow, but I don't want you all to be so afraid that you're going to make a mistake that you don't join an organization. You got to let go of that. I can tell you right now, I've made plenty of mistakes. My dad can tell you too. If you watch the latest broadcast of the ALD this year, you'll see my mistakes, but I still put myself out there and I still force myself to be uncomfortable, because I understand that my ancestors died for me to be sitting here talking to you today. And it's my responsibility to do the same thing for those who haven't even been conceived yet. I truly believe that. And I will die fighting for Africa. So in doing that, you're going to have to put yourself out there. There's no other way to do that. Even if you're not publicly emceeing an event, maybe you're operating the broadcast on YouTube. That's still putting yourself out there. People are still going to be able to critique you when the YouTube page doesn't come up, but you still got to let that go, because the people need these resources and they need our labor and our intelligence around these resources. So that's part of what organizing has done for me, is it's allowed me to let go of some of that, because before I was a lot more uptight, and now I'm like, no, I know I'm going to make some mistakes, but I also know I'm going to keep learning and growing, and hopefully I won't make the same mistakes next year in ALD if I'm allowed to MC again. We'll see. But we just keep going and we go from there. So organizing work presupposes that people participate and that initial work are already aware of this problem and they're interested in expanding. And so it only needs people. And so when we think about the people in the AAPRP, revolutionary organizations such as the AAPRP, we're not going to use media. A, because we don't believe in introducing the oppressor into our business. And B, we don't need media to cultivate and highlight what the problem is. We're already more aware of the problem than media can ever be. And we're already working actively to address the problem than media can ever be. We actually care about fixing the problem, unlike media. We're not interested in gaining rates and attention. We're interested in changing the conditions for people everywhere. And so you don't have to be programmed by capitalism, because that's not the only way that you can assign value and understanding what's going on. Another way to put this is just because something isn't in capitalist media doesn't mean it isn't critical to building capacity to advance humanity. Or because you don't see it doesn't mean it isn't consequential or that it isn't happening. Organizing work has created foundations for some of the most significant work that we have experienced. If you take the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and their day-to-day organizing work with building up, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and their day-to-day organizing work with building the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which led to them building the Lowndes County Freedom Organization in Alabama. Well, that paved the way for the Black Panther movement, which personified the overwhelming advancement of consciousness, not only among African masses, but among masses of people, period, in this country. Because before that, the Black Power movement, everything in this country, to how you look, dress, spoke, etc., was uniform. And the model being followed was that petty bourgeois European model. The Black Power movement came to smash all of that, which opened the door for the women's liberation movement, the LGBTQ movement, the ableist movement, and so on and so forth. And so even the American Indian movement credited their inspiration to the Black Power movement. So here's the strong example of the power of organizing work to impact long ranging and reaching changes based on building relationships, capacity, and consciousness. I will close with this. Every weekend on Sunday, whatever time zone you are in, when you join this seminar, you hear us say, join an organization working for justice. Notice that we don't say join an organization that promotes capitalism. We don't say that. We also don't say join a mobilization. We don't say that either. We specifically say join an organization that is working for justice, because we want you all to not only decide on a collective problem, but we want you and whoever you're organizing with to figure out a collective solution that will benefit humanity. If you are joining an organization that is not benefiting humanity, then you are considered the enemy and we will take you down. But if you are in fact in an organization that is based on humane principles and helping to help people that are poor, colonized people, women identifying folks, any of those situations, then we can work with that, especially if you're not in our organization. We don't need everyone in the AAPRP. What we need is for people to be in an organization, period, that is working for justice, because it's going to take all of us. As I said earlier, we're all going to have to organize against the oppressor, which means we might as well collectively do that and have the numbers to prove it, because there are more of us than there are of them. But we need to take them down one by one. And that includes our European comrades. They need to understand that we're going to need them too, but you all have to value humanity to do that. And you need to take your mobilizing experience and join an organization where you can cultivate that experience and sharpen it into actual skills that can be used to develop solutions for these collectivized problems that we all agree exist. Join an organization working for justice. Ashe.
Ashe, Ashe. And just want to continue on. I want to dig a little deeper into what Shakura mentioned, using Dr. King and Malcolm X as examples to illustrate the fundamental differences between organization work and mobilization work. And so, as Shakur mentioned, Dr. King was a great mobilizer. And just to further clarify that, what we mean by that is Dr. King's work was always specifically designed around highlighting an issue, racial segregation, the Vietnam War being a problem and being an immoral war. And that was Dr. King's work. In fact, the organizers that Dr. King worked with, like the people in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, they talk about often how there was a lot of constant struggle, because if you know the history of that civil rights movement in this backward country, because there were not enough people to do the work that they wanted to do, they formed an organization called COFO, the Confederated Organizations that work together. So they had King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Congress of Racial Equality. These are organizations all work together. And so one of the criticisms that was constant in the movement was that King would come into a town and give a speech, and then he would leave. And that was the criticism that organizers waged against King and the SCLC. They would come in, they would bring all this media attention, all this money into the town. He would come in, and it was almost like a celebrity thing, the way they saw it. He would give a speech and he would leave. Now, of course, his work was good. His speeches were very clear and concise in terms of articulating the problem. But the point that the organizers were making is that they had to stay in the area. Unlike King didn't, because he was doing mobilization work, he didn't stay in the area for months. He came a couple of hours, maybe a day or so, and then he went on to the next place. Whereas the organizers, like in SNCC or CORE, they stayed somewhere for months to build up a project. And because they were doing that, they faced constant danger for doing that work. So if you want to understand, well, why couldn't they use the media? Well, think about it. How could they be building the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, which was designed to break white supremacy in Lowndes County, Alabama, and have the media reporting on their work? They would be setting themselves to be easy targets for the Ku Klux Klan. So they wanted to operate under the radar. And so they dealt with the daily problems that the people who lived in these areas dealt with in terms of building these projects. And so their criticism of King is that you don't really understand what these folks are dealing with because you're not here like we are doing the day-to-day work. You're not doing the day-to-day organizing work. And this is the primary reason why the devotion to nonviolence as a principle broke down, because these organizers were living day-to-day in these Southern communities. They saw the naked terror that was directed against our people. And they saw that our people's response to this was never going to be, well, we shall overcome. You know, anybody that has any roots, and most African people in this backward country do, to the Southern US because of the slave system, you know that people in the South have guns. That's just the lifestyle in the South. People hunt, they fish, they have guns. My family's from Louisiana. I've been around guns my whole life. When I was a little child, there were always guns around. And so this, you know, the capitalist system wants to promote this false narrative that, you know, African people, we just sing hymns when we're being brutalized. We don't know how to defend ourselves, and we don't have that concept. And if you believe any part of that, that's because you're listening to our enemies, because that's never been our history. So we've always defended ourselves. And so these folks saw that these people in the South were willing to do that at all times, and did do that often. And so because of that, they saw that it was kind of absurd to be talking about nonviolence as a principle when people were throwing firebombs into your house and shooting at you when you run out. But their argument and their critique against King is that you were not there every day to experience that. So you could say nonviolence is a principle because you didn't have to deal with those conditions every day. And I'm not saying I know the history of Dr. King better than most people. So I'm not saying that he didn't have to encounter any terrorism. All of our people who dare stand up everywhere in the world have to experience terrorism, but there were degrees of it. And that was the argument that these organizers made when they were waging that critique. And then in comparison, as Shakur mentioned, Malcolm was not only a great mobilizer, but a great organizer. So any organizer has to know how to organize events. Any organizer has to know how to bring attention to a problem. So African Liberation Day, for example, in building the All African People's Revolutionary Party, you could say, if you're on the outside and you just get a flyer, oh, come to African Liberation Day, in your mind, that might not be any different to you than come to a Black Lives Matter rally, because we're talking about the problems. You come to African Liberation Day, we're talking about African people oppressed in 120 countries. We have to unite and we have to liberate Africa. So the problem is colonialism and capitalism. And we talk a lot about that at events like African Liberation Day, at events like Pan-African Women's Day, which is coming up. But the difference is that unlike strictly mobilization events, we don't ask people just to come to Pan-African Women's Day or African Liberation Day or Our Ancestors' Voices or whatever, the Pantula podcast or the Pan-African Weekly News. We don't ask people to come to these events and participate and then just go on about your business. We ask you to make a commitment. At every event we ask you to do that. We ask you to make a commitment. We want to collect names. We want to know who you are. We want to follow up with you. We want to call you and talk to you. We want to ask you if you're willing to participate in the work study process. And if you're not, if you're willing to participate in some other organization's process. So even though organizers use mobilizing work to get to people, the difference is organizers don't just stop at mobilization. They continue on to the things I just mentioned, the follow-up, the getting people engaged. So they continue to the organizing work. So every organizer is also a great mobilizer, although many mobilizers never engage in organizing work. And I would argue that if you look at the wonderful body of work of people like Dr. King, he never engaged in organizing work. He never was focused on trying to build organizations to achieve a certain solution to a problem that was independent of the system. You know, other than getting people's attention that racial segregation was wrong and applying pressure on the system, the moral pressure to change that. That's what his organization was focused on. Nothing wrong with that. It's great work. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that work. So I'm not criticizing mobilization work, just trying to help people understand the difference between mobilization and organization. And then organizing work, and I would say particularly revolutionary organizing work, is always about building capacity, because we know that we are solution focused. And for us, the solution is Pan-Africanism. And we know we need millions of African people to achieve that objective. So we have to constantly engage in capacity building work. So I have a saying I use to give you, an understanding what I mean when I say that. And I say that 95% of my life is spent around people I don't agree with. Like in the APRP, we don't sit around talking to each other all the time. We don't sit around talking to people that already agree with us. We intentionally go out among people who don't share our point of view, and we engage in ideological struggle, because that's the only way we can grow the ranks of the movement. And when I say grow the ranks, of course, the objective is always to recruit people, Africans, into the APRP. But part of that work is supported by creating an environment, a culture where organization work is expected, where organization work is desired. And so that culture, that environment can be created among any people, non-Africans, any people. So that's what Shakur is correct. That's why I wrote the book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, Fascist Violence. That book has exposed me to many Africans. I do work with many Africans, some in the APRP. A couple of APRP work study circles read the book, and I did sessions with them to answer their questions about the book. There are African groups that are not even in the APRP who read the book, and I've done work with them to help them identify organizing work that they feel like they want to do. And as Shakur mentioned, non-African groups who want to do the work, the same thing. The group that Shakur mentioned, I met with them last Wednesday, meet with them all the time, and they are now reading Kwame Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, as well as my book, and they are considering political organizing work that they want to do in the community they live in. So the reason why I do that is because the more they do that, imagine that. If we had white people out here who understood Nkrumah's analysis on Pan-Africanism, who were doing work within white communities, even a grade school student can understand that reality, as it grows, will just make our work that much harder. I mean, that much easier. It'll make our work that much easier. It'll create a climate where our work becomes that much easier. So it makes sense to do that. So that's why people, well, why would you work with white people? They're not, like, you just don't get it. Like, white people are, if they're not conscious, they're in our way. They're sent to kill us. They're sent to snitch on us. They're sent to destroy us. So yeah, if there are white people who say, yeah, I want to do work to combat the system, and I want to do it in conjunction with what the APRP is doing, then absolutely, I'm going to spend a little time trying to help them do that. That just in the long run will strengthen the work that we're trying to do. So we want to talk just briefly about how do we make mobilization work stronger, because a lot of people, the way we're trained in this society. I mean, and when I say society, I mean the whole world, because capitalism dominates the planet. So it doesn't matter where you live. But the way we're trained, you know, it's really based on this bourgeoisie concept and idealism. You know, those things are so dominant. Like everybody believes things that they piece things together in their head that are not connected to material reality. And so they believe them because they see it in their head, even though it's never what they believe has never been tested. They don't even know how to test it. They don't even have a concept of how to verify whether what they're thinking can actually be put into practice. That's what we mean when we say bourgeois idealism. It's dominant in the society. People believe all kind of stuff that has no grounding in reality. And so because of that, when you say organization and mobilization, you know, a lot of people interpret that like, well, they're saying mobilization is, you know, that's a bad thing. And so just to illustrate that that's not what we're saying, we're all saying that we all came here through mobilization work, but we're saying that we need to not stop just at mobilization work. We want to talk about, for those of you who agree with mobilization work and you're like, that's what I want to do, that's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, we encourage and support you doing that, but we want to wage some principal criticisms about how you can do it better than how it's being done right now. So the first thing is that we have to eliminate this misconception that mobilization automatically means spontaneous. You know, it's always great. I love seeing it when people protest things, like a couple of weeks ago when they overturned the Roe v. Wade decision. If you don't know, it's, you know, giving women's rights with their bodies and what they want to do with their bodies. That was overturned in this backward country, and people protested. And here in the city I live in, people went out on the freeway and shut Interstate 5. It's one of the main highway arteries in this country, you know, and it flows through California, Oregon, and Washington. You know, that's 50 million people. You know, there's 350 million people in the whole country. So it's a major artery. So they shut it down for 20 minutes or so. Spontaneous. I can guarantee you, I wasn't there, but I can guarantee you there wasn't a plan that everybody knew. They didn't have it mapped out how they were going to shut. You know, people were upset and they decided, let's go storm the highway. And they did that. Nothing wrong with that. It's great, because the fact that they did that demonstrates that it can be done, even if it was just for 20 minutes. And the fact that we know it can be done shows us that it can be done even on a higher level. So that's a good thing, but it doesn't have to be spontaneous. We can have a higher level of organization to act like that. Just think about just a little organization. It doesn't even have to be a lot. Like just say, okay, we want to organize teams of 75 people, have 3 teams of 75 people to shut the freeway down. I mean, you know, if you have these rallies, you have thousands of people that come to these rallies. You can't get 225 people out of thousands of people to commit to something. Of course you can. So get 3 teams of 75 people. The first team of 75 people is going to go on the highway. They're going to stay there for 3 hours. Then the second team is going to relieve them and stay on the highway for 3 more hours. Then the third team is going to do the same. And then by that time, you have another team ready to come back. So the point being, and you have people that bring water and food, and you have a way for people to, you know, fulfill their bodily needs. Just that little level of organization. And you could shut that freeway down, not for 20 minutes, for at least at a minimum, several days. And if you know anything about capitalism, shutting a main artery down, highway artery, for several days is devastating. Devastating. I mean, any of you who have needed parts for a car during this pandemic, you understand how easy it is to disrupt this system. If you needed any kind of parts for an air conditioner in your house or whatever you needed, you know how easy it is to disrupt this system. So if you could do that small level organization, you would put yourself in the position to have capacity to make this system listen to your demands. That's what you're doing with mobilization work. That's not our work. We're not trying to get the system to listen to us. We're trying to organize capacity to overthrow the system. But you say you have faith that the system can be changed and all it needs to happen is for it to be reformed. So all we're saying right now is, well, here's some ideas to help you get in a better position to do that. Because you're not going to ever be able to do that just by being able to get on the freeway for 20 minutes, they can manage through 20 minutes. They cannot manage through 5 days, 6 days. So just a little work can get you there. And then another thing is that you have to have organized political education, because it just escalates the process. Because like Shakur said, mobilization work, some of the people there that are against police terrorism are in the Democratic Party. Some of them are in the Republican Party. Some of them are in the Green Party. Some of them are anarchists. Some of them are socialists. Some of them don't know what the hell they are. So if you have political education, that'll permit you the opportunity to challenge people to think about what they are. And then that way, when they get to the point where they're like, okay, the rallies are great, but I'm ready to do something else, they're better prepared to understand what that something else is. So that's what I mean by escalating the work, raising the level of the work. And those of you who do mobilization work, we're asking you to help us, because those people come to us. I'm ready to do something more than that. So help create the bridge for that to happen. Have political education as a part of your work. So when you have a rally, pass out articles, read them. Maybe you won't be able to print articles for everyone, but you can at least spend 15, 20 minutes talking about something to get people to focus on something larger than just their anger. That would be very beneficial to moving us forward on a collective level, if that was to happen. So just little things like that are helpful. Mobilization can develop mechanisms to advance political concepts through the examples I just gave. So that would be a very critical contribution. And then mobilizations can promote people joining organizations. Just even at these mobilizations, if that ask was made, and I participated in mobilizations for years. You know, one of our tactics is to do security at a lot of these marches. And then that gets people beyond the, oh, all African peoples, I'm scared of that title, and those people, they're terrorists. Once they see you out there helping them, then you break all that down. And so we build relationships. That's why I do that work. Done it for years. And so when you do that, I go to these events all the time, and I'm saying, why don't you just say, join an organization, allow organizations to come and set up tables. Don't charge them. Charge the people selling stuff if you need to make money, but allow the organizations to set up at your events so that they can, because organizations struggle to reach people because we don't have the resources to do that, because we're revolutionaries. You know, we don't get any donations. We don't get the donations that mobilization organizations get. We don't get that because we're not acceptable in this society. So we're not going to get that same level of support. So mobilization or folks engaged in mobilization work could really help increase the capacity of the movement, which helps them, us, all of us, by just having organizations at your event, setting up tables and telling people to go talk to those folks, giving those folks 2 seconds on the mic to talk about who they are. That will strengthen the work all of us are doing if we do that. So just some quick ideas to do that. And also just to say that if we're talking about making organization work stronger, doing the internal work to ensure we are in a healthy place to carry out our organizing work. Now, I just want to say about that, a lot of you and a lot of folks, I hear this all the time. They say, well, I'm for revolution. I'm a socialist. I'm this, and they're not in any organization. And I tell them, they get mad, but I tell them all the time, you can't be a socialist and not in a socialist organization. That's not possible. Again, bourgeois idealism. Well, it's in my head, so to me it exists. Well, that's just in your head. We're not concerned about what's in your head, because there could be all kind of confusion in your head. And in fact, I'm telling you, if you don't know, there is. So we can't base what we define the world on that. So you have to have material definitions. If you're not in an organization, then you can't claim it. You can't say you're a doctor, you never gone to medical school. You can't say you're a lawyer and you never gone to law school. You can't say you're a professional athlete and you're not employed by somebody that pays you to play sports. So you can't say you're a revolutionary and a socialist and you're not in an organization building revolution towards socialism. That is not that difficult to understand. Now, that being said, because arguing against that is irrefutable, you can't make a logical argument against that. So we understand that. So that doesn't mean you're a bad person, but it means you got work to do. How did we get you in a socialist organization so you could have a credible record. Because when you sit around, I'm a socialist, and then people see you and they don't see you engage in any work to build socialist organization, then you're giving them ammunition. Well, socialists, they ain't gonna accomplish nothing. Look at him, he's a socialist. Look at her, look at them. They ain't doing nothing but talking. That's why people think that. Well, all that is talk when you talk about socialism, because they're looking at you. They don't understand, because of this dominance of bourgeois idealism, they don't understand that you are not the definition of socialist organizing work. All you are is a definition of more bourgeois idealism, but you can correct that. So we suggest you do that. And if you say, well, I'm an organizer, but you don't know how to meet anybody and start an organization, then you're not even that. You're not an organizer. It doesn't matter. You might belong to an organization that pays you to organize events or whatever. You ain't no organizer in this sense. So if you want to know how to do that, we can help you learn, but you got to take the initiative to say, hey, I want to do this. The people I work with, they all said, hey, I want to do this. And I'm helping them do this because this is our responsibility. So just understand that. And that means making, the people in organizations and the people who need to be in organizations got to make a stronger commitment to making that capacity grow, because you're trying to build capacity. So you can't do that half, you know what? You got to do it 100%. You got to commit yourself to that. You can't just sit on the sidelines and criticize what you don't like. The minute you criticize something, you then have a responsibility to resolve what you're criticizing. That's how we use criticism, self-criticism in the APRP. That's how it was used in the Democratic Party of Guinea. And that's the correct way to use it. You have a responsibility. So if you hear somebody criticizing something and they're not engaged in any work to make it any better, then they're not really interested in resolving it. They're just interested in either just making themselves feel better by bringing something down, or they work for the police, or there's something else going on there. So just understand that. And then prioritizing relationship building with a strong follow-up and follow-through. Again, if you don't know how to have a conversation with someone and get at least one other person to sit down with you and figure out what you want to do, then you're just not serious. It's better to fumble through a conversation. Go up to someone and say, hey, I want to do some work. Do you want to do it? Yeah. And then get there. I don't know. I got us here. We're drinking coffee or tea. I don't even know what to say next. I just know I want to do something. And I felt like you want to do something. What do you think we go from here? There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. In fact, I would have hella respect for anybody who took that approach, because that's honest. It's principled. There is nothing wrong with that. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I just know we need to be here to talk about how we can make a difference. There is nothing. I would have nothing but, and if I heard that conversation, I would turn around and say, excuse me, let me introduce myself. If there's any way I can help you, I would love to do that. And I would not tell them to contact me, because they're not going to. I would get their contact information and follow up with them. So that's something all of us can do. There is no excuse if you're not doing that, other than you're not really serious. You just want to talk about it. You just want to talk about it because talking about it makes you feel like okay about being in a capitalist system, and you really don't have to do anything because you can just talk about it. It makes you feel better. Well, you should just go to church. That's what you should do. So those are important things to understand and approach every day, with you seeing the work as your responsibility. That's what I'm saying, to own and develop it. You have to stop. People are always telling me, let me know when you have something I can work with. What am I, your damn program director? I'm overwhelmed with work. You're not helping. You're not doing anything by trying to pass off your responsibility on people who are already neck deep in work. You should be offering them assistance, not putting more work on their plate. You are not committed to making a change when you do that. You're being lazy intellectually, physically, in every way possible. And that is not acceptable. And you should not expect us to sit here and want to hear what you have to say when we already know it's a bunch of BS. All you have to do is do the things we're talking about. And if you don't know what to do, there is nothing ever wrong with that. Fidel Castro said the only qualification for leadership is sincerity. And that means you make a commitment to at least try. That's all. That's all we say. So we say, thank you for joining us. We're going to be back next week commemorating Black August. So we ask you to come and join us next week July 31st, go to our Forward Ever shop and support. Buy sweatshirts as often as you can, t-shirts as often as you can. Support our revolutionary organization capacity building. Go to AAPRP-INTL.org if you're African and join the All African People's Revolutionary Party. There's that pitch. Join an organization. If you don't want to join us, join some other organization working for us, justice. Sorry. You can go to abetterworld.me and see all of these videos. You want to share them with people. That's the place to go to forward them to people and allow them to watch them. Or YouTube, you can do the same thing at the AAPRPCA channel. It's very easy to share them. Hoodcommunist.org. I'm on the editorial team for that. You can participate with that. Go check it out. We have, again, all of our programs on the bottom. Check them out. We have Pan-African Women's Day coming up. Again, we're building institutions for African revolution. So Pan-African Women's Day, you see there at the top, if you're located in Northern California, where I am, that flyer up there, we're doing a coalition event with Haiti Action Committee and the Black Cultural Zone and the All African People's Revolutionary Party. We're doing an event in Liberation Park, 7101 Foothill Boulevard. If you know anybody in the Yay area, let them know so they can come out and check out Pan-African Women's Day on August 7th from noon to 2 p.m. And then we have a virtual event that has our sister comrades from all over the world. And you can go to AAPRP-INTL.org and find out more about that event. That one's coming up as well. And again, continue to buy my book. We're organizing with it. We need your continued support so that people know about it. We are not going to be on Oprah's book list. We're not going to be on Reese Witherspoon's book list. The only way people know about this book is if you tell them. If you don't tell them, they will not know. So if you are serious about supporting revolutionary work, A Guide for Organized Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence is a great conversation starter. Please let people know, and please support this work that we're trying to do. All we want to do is make the world a better place for all of our people, all of our relatives, all of our future generations. Thank you for being here today. Have a great rest of your evening. Forward ever, backwards never. One unified socialist Africa. We will be free.